Well, Carla Harris does not need an introduction.
Yeah.
Carla Harris is the Vice Chairman and Managing Director of Morgan Stanley, where she serves as a Senior Client Advisor. Previously, she headed the Emerging Manager Platform at Morgan Stanley. Carla has extensive industry experience in technology, media, retail, telecommunication, transportation, industrial, and healthcare sectors. She has served as a senior member of the Equity Syndicate Desk in the M&A department at Morgan Stanley. Carla was appointed by President Obama to chair the National Women's Business Council. She was named as Fortune magazine's list the 50 most powerful Black executives in corporate America, Fortune's most influential list. She's been named on the US Banker's top 25 most powerful women in finance, and also in Black Enterprise top 75 most powerful women in business, and many other such lists. In her other life, Carla is a singer. She has released 3 gospel CDs. Her first CD, entitled Carla's First Christmas, was a bestseller on Amazon.com, and she's been featured on the CBS Evening News. She has performed 5 sold-out concerts at Carnegie Hall. She's also the author of the books Strategize to Win and Expect to Win. I'm just in awe. And to show our admiration for you, Carla, we all are wearing pearls, the men and women here.
Thank you, ma'am.
We are absolutely, absolutely delighted to have you here. So ladies and gentlemen, please give a big round of applause to Carla Harris. So moderating our fireside chat today is Jackie Cushman. Jackie is a syndicate columnist, author, speaker, strategist, corporate financial advisor, and a board member. She has co-authored the book, 5 Principles for a Successful Life. She, in her previous time in corporate finance, she headed the financial planning department of a $3 billion wireless company. Jackie is a chartered financial analyst designation holder. She's a board member for the Atlanta Society Foundation, and she's a very, very active member of the Atlanta Society. So please welcome Jackie.
Thank you, Radna. I am so thrilled to be here today with you.
As am I, Jackie.
I'm glad to have you in Atlanta. It's a little chilly for the month we're in, but I'm sure it's going to warm up. But I'm particularly impressed. I knew that you had, that you were a singer and that you're a gospel singer, but I wasn't aware that you had sung in Carnegie Hall.
Yes, ma'am.
So before we start on our official program, I want to get just your take about what was that like to stand in Carnegie Hall and sing?
No, it was a big deal because, it's not easy to get to Carnegie Hall and to be able to do a benefit concert where every single dime that we raised went to charities. That was an even bigger deal because it was, in my mind, leveraging all of Carla Harris. Carla Harris, the banker, was the person that was negotiating with with Carnegie Hall in order to get into Carnegie Hall around the cost, the labor, and everything that it takes. Carla Harris, the banker, was also the underpinning of the emerging Carla Harris, the producer. But then there was Carla Harris, the singer, who was able to get up there and perform and get other people excited about the charities that I was supporting. So that's frankly why I did the concert, was a way to leverage my own giving.
Right.
Because as a banker, I'm blessed to be able to write that check to the charities. But I thought, how about amplifying what I can do? If people are interested in hearing me sing, why don't I do that and not only give what I'm giving, but also have all these other people exposed so they can also help these charities. So it worked out quite well.
Absolutely. So you're such an accomplished woman. You've done so many things. And we're going to talk about those. But I want to talk a little bit about how you progressed through your career and how you can now bring all of Carla Harris to whatever you're doing. So you're not just doing it from a professional standpoint, but bringing yourself fully to the singing and the charities. And tell me a little bit more about the charities that you're interested in.
Sure. So let's talk about that journey, because at the heart of that, frankly, is authenticity. And some of you know that I've written, and as you just heard in the introduction, the book called Expect to Win. And the very first chapter of that book is around authenticity. And that is not what I intended when I wrote the book, because there were other lessons that I thought I learned that were far more important, that I thought would help anybody to maximize their success, the pearls as I like to call them. But the reason I wrote about authenticity, frankly, Jackie, is that I kept having people ask me about how do you bring your whole self to work?
Right.
And I started to think about when I first started on Wall Street, I certainly brought the person that I thought was supposed to be successful on Wall Street. So the person that was analytically very driven and very strong, quantitatively very strong, and not really even thinking about those other parts of who I was. And after a few years, I started to realize that while I was doing well, I wasn't doing as well as I could have if I had brought the whole Carla to the table. Because when you are in the client business, the way that you can really penetrate and own clients in a proprietary way is to bring your authentic self. When you bring your authentic self to the table, people trust you. And trust is at the heart of any successful relationship. So once I realized that I could just be who I was, and that in fact was my distinct competitive advantage, then my career started to soar. And that's why I wrote about it. So now, you're right. Carla Harris, the banker, walks in the room. Carla Harris, the singer, walks in the room. Carla Harris, the mom. Carla Harris, the prayer warrior. Carla Harris, the investment manager. Carla Harris, the speaker, writer. All those Carlas walk in the room. Then I don't have to preoccupy myself with what I think you want to hear or what I think it will take for you to be impressed. I can simply relax and meet you wherever you are. And that will give me the ability to connect in a way that I could potentially own that relationship in a way that my competitors never would be able to.
So you talk about how during the writing of this book, that wasn't one of your original pearls,
right.
but you came to that during the process. And part of that is the uncovering process and the thinking process. So give us a few more pearls of wisdom, 2 or 3 more.
Sure. In the first book, these were the things that I learned that really, really made the difference. So chapter 4 really was going to be chapter 1, and that is perception is the co-pilot to reality. How people perceive you will directly impact how they deal with you. While the reality of how smart you are has something to do with your success equation, the reality of how hard you work has something to do with your success equation. What really drives your success equation in any environment is the perception that the marketplace has about you. What lens are they looking through when they're looking at you? And if you want to maximize your success in any seat, you must understand the adjectives that are associated with success for the seat that you're sitting in or the seat that you aspire to sit in. If you don't understand the adjectives that are associated with success, you can work really hard, but you won't maximize your success in that seat because you're working in a way that is inconsistent with the way that they are thinking about success. So for example, if you're in a finance role, people better say you are analytical, quantitative. If you're in a marketing role, they better say that you're creative, out-of-the-box thinker. If you're in a sales role, they should describe you as commercial, relationship-oriented. So when you go into a new environment, you should always understand how they're thinking about success. And if you did not ask that question before you took your job and you get assigned to a new assignment, always take the time to ask the question of the person that will be evaluated. Hey, George, how are you thinking about success on this project? Or hey, Nancy, how would you describe somebody that's a superstar in this role? They're going to give you adjectives. Now you know what they value. So your behavior should be consistent around that which they value. Now, if you're interviewing, you should always ask that question at the end of the interview, describe a superstar in this environment for me. The next question, however, you should ask is, give me the profile of the last person you fired. How would you describe that person? When somebody doesn't make it in this environment, why don't they make it? Now they're also going to give you adjectives. Now you also know what they don't value and what not to bring. So the point of that pearl was that understand the adjectives, but more importantly, understand that you can train people to think about you the way you want them to think about you. And that's what I describe in the book. And the way that you do that is to have consistent behavior around those 3 adjectives. Your behavior needs to be consistent, and your language needs to be consistent. So if I want you to think about me as analytical and quantitative, then anytime that we're together in the meeting, I'll say things like, so now what are the numbers telling us on this analysis? You know, the numbers never lie. You know, I'm only focused on what the numbers are saying. Or there are 3 reasons why I think this, or 2 hypotheses around this. And while the qualitative matters, it's really about the quantitative. So let's get to that. Every time I see you or we're together, my speech is going to reflect that. So when I'm not in the room and someone says, tell me a little bit about Carla, you may say, I don't know anything else about her, but I know she's a numbers geek. She's a numbers
Always
geek.
bringing them up, right?
That's exactly right. And you do the same thing if you want people to say you're creative. You do the same thing if you want people to say that you are team-oriented, that you're all about the team. You do the same thing if you want people to think that you're customer-oriented and that you are commercial and relationship-driven. Same thing. But you can train people. That was the biggest lesson, I think, out of Expect to Win. And the other one was around taking risks and how important it is to take risks in your career, because that's really what allows you to grow. If you're taking the safe strategy, you're probably missing out on some opportunities.
So let's talk a little bit about, get a little personal for a minute, and tell us maybe 1 or 2 risks that you've taken in your career. And my guess is, you mentioned when we were talking before, that there's probably some fear around that risk-taking or mistakes made at some point.
Yes.
So tell us maybe a personal story or 2 about how that happened, right?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I have a few, and I have taken a lot. But I'll tell you the point around why we don't take more risks is that we're scared. We're just scared. It's fear. And one of the things that I always say when I have the privilege and the honor of speaking in front of a group of people is that fear has no place in our success equation. Fear has no place in your success equation. Anytime you approach anything in your life, personally or professionally, from a position of fear, you always underpenetrate that opportunity. And one of the big risks that I took in my career is the year that I was up for the big promotion of managing director, the guy that I had already pointed out as my sponsor, the person that I thought was going to be the person that would speak for me behind closed doors for that promotion, he asked me to go to a new role. And I knew in my gut that I should not go to that new role, because this was a critical year. I had already made that mistake earlier in my career, moving in a promotion year.
Right.
And when you do that, the people that you move from, they have no reason to fight for you. The new folks say, she's the new girl on the block, we're not gonna fight for her. So there you are, stuck in the middle. So I knew that I should not move. Plus I knew that I was really good at what I was doing. So the probability of my having a heightened chance of success in that role was much higher than going to something new. And oh, by the way, it was a brand new role that had never existed before. So you all know what that means, right? If it's brand new and it never existed, then chances are they don't know how to value it or to evaluate it. So the risk was, if I said no to him, the risk was that he wouldn't support me when it came time for promotion a few months later. But I am a big fan of Shakespeare, to thine own self be true, and I knew that I shouldn't move, so I told him no. And I took the shot that he would support me anyway, and he did. But that was a huge risk. Another risk, 25 years into it, I decided to leave my role in capital markets and to go try something completely new at the firm. And little did I know that we were about to have the financial services crisis, because I left in the second quarter of 2008. All right?
Right.
And I had never done anything in asset management before, so I also didn't know first-time team, first-time fund, you already have hurricane force winds in your face to get that done, right? So I moved over at that time. We ultimately were not able to get the fund done because the Volcker rule was enacted, so that meant the $50 million that Morgan Stanley committed was going to have to go down to maybe 3 or 5, and lots of other reasons. But I always tell people that when you're faced with a risk and you're not sure whether or not you should do it, ask yourself 3 questions. Will that new thing give you skills and experiences that you would not get if you stayed in your current seat another 12 months? Second question, will that new thing expose you to people, relationships, and networks that you would not get if you stayed in your current seat another 12 months? Third question, will that new thing generate new branches on your personal decision tree of opportunity, i.e. you could go off and do some other things you wouldn't have been able to do if you stayed in your current seat another 12 months. And if the answer to all three of those questions is yes, you should absolutely take the risk. So despite the fact that we did not complete the fund, and I left my cushy, highly successful capital market seat to now potentially into the unknown, right? Was it the case that my three criteria stood the test of time? Yes. Did I learn things that I would not have learned if I stayed in my capital market seat for another 12 months? What happened in the capital markets in 2009? What happened in 2010? What happened in 2011? Absolutely nothing. So I would not have added anything to my intellectual or my experiential tool chest had I stayed in that seat. Second question, did I meet people or build networks and relationships that I wouldn't have had? Throughout my 25-year career, I had never worked with asset allocators. My clients were primarily corporate clients, but I didn't have a relationship with $125 billion fund at that time of Texas teachers. I had never talked to the CIO at Safeway. So all of a sudden, relationships that we did not have even in our investment management division, I was able to create and open up for the firm because they all wanted to talk about this emerging manager topic, even though the market was like it was. Everybody could see what was happening. They wanted to have conversations about it. So that got me in the door, and it gave me the ability to build upon those relationships. And third thing, can you now go off and do some other things that you wouldn't have been able to do? Absolutely. I knew nothing about asset management when I went over to the investment management division. And now I could run an investment management firm, right? So it was worth taking that risk. And in fact, despite the fact that we didn't complete the fund, people who had said yes to the fund said, when we said we were going to suspend it, they said, oh, we like your strategy. We've done all this work. We have the allocation approved. Will you manage it in this strategy in a separately managed account? And that started our track record.
So it ended up working out in the end. To
Yep.
your point, a little bumpy in the middle, but you knew you were learning new things, making new networks, going the right way.
But the thing technically failed, right? The thing that I supposedly went over to
you
do.
didn't fail.
Absolutely.
Because you got to move
It
on
was
and
worth-
do something special.
It was
Yeah,
worth
it's
taking the
different.
risk.
That's fabulous. So one of the things we were talking about earlier before you got here was really the lack of women on corporate boards.
Yeah.
And I know that you've recently taken a board seat in Walmart. So talk a little bit about the process that you've gone through, as well as, you know, if there are women that are out here that obviously have financial experience, that are interested, kind of what should they do, as well as the men, but what that process has been like for you.
Yes, and I have to tell you, I think it's a good time for women on boards because boards are starting to realize that they need other types of expertise. And it used to be the case, as you and I were starting to talk about, that you needed to be a sitting CEO. But over the last 5 years, those folks who were CFOs, treasurers, they are in demand on these boards. People who have social media expertise, in demand. Notice that it used to be you had to be 50 plus to be on a board, but increasingly you're seeing large Fortune 500 companies take the 38-year-old, the 42-year-old, the 33-year-old on the board because of the kind of expertise. Increasingly, they want someone who has international expertise, markets expertise. So I think the fact that boards are recognizing that they need other type of talent, that is going to play very well for women. 3 things you need to do if you're a woman and you want to get on the board. The first of all, make sure you check all the boxes with the large executive search firms that traffic in this space, because most boards will talk to their board members and say, hey, we're looking for this kind of board member. If you know someone, you know, bring it to the CEO's attention or bring it to the CHRO's attention. But usually they will also go to a Spencer Stewart or a Russell Reynolds or a Heidrick and Struggles, for example. So make sure that you've gotten in front of those partners that are focusing on the board practice. So at least they know their name. Why is that important? Because when someone else calls them, even though they have already been engaged, and the CEO says, hey, do you know Jackie? And they say, oh yes, because you're already in their database. So you make them look good as well. So you want to check that box. That's number 1. Number 2, you want to make sure that you talk to as many people as you know that are already on boards, so that they know that you are interested in going on a board. Because I do personally believe that 90% of the folks that get on these boards are really from a referral of somebody else sitting around that table. that somebody else sitting around that table has said to the CEO, you ought to get to know her, or I think she'd be great for our board. And then the third thing that I would tell you is to make sure that you go to some of the, whether it's NACD or there's a couple here in Atlanta, because I know I've spoken at a couple of them, organizations that are focused on getting women on boards, because increasingly I'm finding that some companies are actually going to these organizations as they hear about them and getting 2 or 3 names. So again, you want to be active in those spaces as well. The other thing that I would tell you, those are the top 3, but the other thing that I would tell you is to make sure you get your pitch tight in terms of why you want to be on the board. Because I think the most critical questions are, why do you want to be on the board? Why are you interested in being on this board? And what do you think you bring to the table that's your area of expertise? Because when you answer to generally, oh, I think I'd be great for a board, and I'm just really interested in serving in that capacity, you haven't said anything about me that makes me feel special as the company that's asking you that question. So, and you don't want to say, I'm just interested in a board, right? because now, and you laugh, but I've had lots of people say that, right? And they are legitimate and accomplished, fabulous pedigrees, but then you look like, oh, just any board will do. So you want to let the listener hear that you have been strategic about your desire to serve. I want to be on a CPG board, consumer products company. I want to be on a retail board. I want to be on a technology board. I want to be on a healthcare board. Be ready for the trick question. Well, Jackie, would you do a railroad board? And then you just gave me 4 or 5 things, and I say railroad, and then you say, yeah, I'm not going to do that, right? You don't want to do that. You want to say, no, I don't think I'll be particularly good for railroad because I really haven't had that much exposure to the transportation industry. So I don't think that I would be, you know, constructive around the key success factors, the challenges, or the other things the company might deal with. But here's why I think I'd be good in these 3 spaces. So that's what I mean by get your story tight.
It's all about the fit. So talk a little, we heard earlier about the transition of wealth, how it's been transitioned primarily to women.
Yeah.
The majority will be controlled by women over the next few decades. So talk about what do you think that means both for companies and also for people that manage money?
Yes, great question. And our research tells us the transition will happen in the next decade, not even the next few decades, and it's trillions of dollars that will happen. So here's what I think will change. I think that you're probably going to see an increase in ESG or specific, you know, custom-driven investing, as I like to call it, because I think that you'll have more and more women that will want to invest around the things that they really care about. And oh, by the way, there is an increasing amount of research that shows that you can have outstanding returns while also doing good. So I think people are going to have to think about that a little bit more critically. I think you will have women of significant means that say, I don't want to invest in a company that don't have 2 women on the board. Or I don't want to invest in a company that don't have 2 people of color on the board. Or I don't want to invest in a business where there's not 2 senior women in positions of leadership, because I happen to believe that makes a difference in the decision making there. So I think you're going to see changes overall around the kinds of things that people invest in. I think you're going to see a huge shift with respect to who's managing money, right? Because, you know, let's face it, in the wealth management space, there's been lots of instances where, you know, Mary and Paul had an advisor for 40 years, but every time the advisor visited, they only talked to Paul, and Mary was sitting in the room, right? And do you think Mary's going to leave that money with you when Paul kicks the bucket? Probably not, right? So, you know, you got to think about how you are going to, bring more family dynamics into your conversation if you're an advisor today. And you got to think, and I know you guys just had a session on selling to women versus men, but I think you got to think about how you serve that differently. And what I tell some of my colleagues is that if you're going in a room where the decision maker is a woman, let's say you're talking to a pension fund or a foundation, you better have another woman in the room on the team, right? Because that woman cares, and you can't just have any woman, because game recognizes game, right? So you better have somebody that is worthy.
With the program.
That's right, worthy of her. And if you do, you're going to get an extra check because she cares. She's never going to tell you she cares, but she cares. And the same thing with folks of color. We care. We may not say it up front, but we're going to look at that team and say,
I think that's very important. So let's talk, and let's kind of expand the conversation. And you kind of referenced it in your answer, but Talk a little about, we've heard about it's good to have diversity, it's good to have women, it's good to have all sorts of, whether it's ethnic or color, whatever it is, diversity. But talk about the business case for it.
Yes.
And you're ready for it.
Yeah, I am. I'm a big fan of looking at it through a commercial lens, because for us to say it's the right thing to do, you and I might not agree on the right thing to do, but we will agree on the commercial thing to do, right? So if you think about it like this, I can't think of any industry that is not competing in some way around innovation. Every single industry. Innovation is the dominant competitive parameter across all industries. Well, if you're competing around innovation and you need that one idea that will allow you to obtain and retain a leadership position, then you need a lot of ideas in the room, because innovation is born from ideas. If you need a lot of ideas in the room, you need a lot of perspectives in the room, because ideas are born from perspectives. If you need a lot of perspectives in the room, you need a lot of experiences in the room, because perspectives are born from experiences. And if you need a lot of experiences in the room, you better have a lot of different people in the room, because experiences are born from people. So to get to that one idea that will allow you to obtain and retain a leadership position, you must start with a lot of different people in the room. That is the business case for diversity. And if you are trying to innovate and you do not have diverse perspectives and voices around the table, you're going to have a gap. And if you have a gap in your product offering or your process, you're not going to obtain that leadership position, and you certainly will not sustain it. And you have to make sure that you have that at the table if you're going to compete in today's environment. I look at all the footfalls that companies are making now.
Right.
And there is another customer out there that did not exist 20 years ago, and I would argue really didn't exist 10 years ago, although Facebook was born 13 years ago, and that is social media. It used to be a company could be concerned about three constituencies: its customers, its shareholders, and its employees. Now there's a fourth customer out there called community. And increasingly, companies are realizing that they have a responsibility to the community and to try to help solve some of society's ills. And who you are and how you show up in the world that you do business with increasingly matters. And now, if you do something, there's this thing called social media that can take your stock down 5%, 10%, 15%. And it had nothing to do with your company's overall performance, but it starts to matter. It gets amplified even in shareholders' minds when they see what has transpired. So you just look around, and I don't need to name any company's names, but you can look for the last 6 months of the footfalls that have been made.
So you talked in the last answer, we talked a little bit about community and giving back. And so one of the things that we've done in Atlanta is we've started a foundation as part of this society, and we're focusing on financial literacy, with the idea that we can't just operate in this community and pretend like it's nothing important, nothing else happens, but really focusing, because we are in finance, not on people that are out, really the college students, to make sure that they know how to write a check, make sure they don't spend too much, don't get bad credit, the whole thing. But tell us a little bit about where you are with your charitable contributions.
Oh yes, sorry about that.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah. But I want to hear, I'm sure there's a personal connection and why it's important to you.
Yeah, it's no question it's important. And my charities have focused in 4 areas. One, education, kids in education. The other one was arts. The other one has been hunger. And the fourth one is healthcare. Because as I get more seasoned, not old, seasoned, as I get more seasoned, and I've become a consumer on behalf of my parents, I realize the inequity of distribution in healthcare, and that's something that we should be focused on, no question about it. But financial literacy, I applaud you and the organization for focusing on that, because it's one of the things that is really going to make a difference for us as we go forward, particularly if we find ourselves as a country in the position of having to manage our own assets as we get older. I mean, you think about all the people who've been working for 30, 40, 50, 60 years, and they never had to manage money outside of a checking account and maybe savings. And now to think about, they have to invest that in a way that's going to take care of them for that extra 20, 25 years that they're going to live, that their parents and grandparents didn't live, and they don't know how. That's scary. A lot of mistakes that can be made. And there are obviously lots of people that are willing to scam you and take that as well. And I think for kids, it's going to be important, especially as they lead in different industries and as they try to lead and become leaders in different companies. Just think, you couldn't say, I want to be the CMO of Facebook. It didn't exist 13 years ago. So there's going to be other companies that, don't exist today, that we hope that these folks will be productive leaders and citizens in. So almost all of the organizations that I'm involved with have some component in some way of financial literacy. And Jackie, while I have no, let me say it loudly, I have no political aspirations, none. You know, people ask me all the time, are you going to run? Are you going to run? And I don't have any political aspirations, but I'll tell you the one job that I would do, and that is Secretary of Education. Why? Because I would make financial literacy mandatory in the 3rd grade.
And that
Because by then, by 3rd grade, you have the multiplication tables down. You know, you can add and subtract. You're already working on division. You might be working on, you know, some geometry at that point. But if you think about what we do as financial professionals, I mean, there may be a few people in the room who are traders that use derivatives, right? But most of us who are financial professionals, let's admit it, it's addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. That's it. I won it today while I suffered through calculus in college. I won it today, right? It's not that hard. But, you know, you'd be surprised at how many people don't get exposed to it, even when they're little. You know, I had a grandmother who was an entrepreneur. So, and my grandmother was all about the money, and she was very successful. So I knew about money when I was in grade school, right? So that wasn't ever foreign. And when my father gave me my first credit card at 16, I knew about how to manage it. And if nothing else, I was scared to go home and tell my daddy I had run the bill up, right? So, but I had a sense of that, and it's so critical.
It is critical, and to your point, you know, there's some families that will talk about it like yours did, and they'll lay that out, and there's some families that are scared to talk about it.
Yeah.
There's some families that can't talk about it. So to your point, there needs to be some type of education for children to make sure they understand that, because unfortunately, if it gets too far along, then you really get in a crisis, and it's
That's
very
right.
hard to recover from. So I'm going to ask one more question,
Yep.
and then after that, we're going to open it up to the audience.
Yes.
So I wanted to give you all a few minutes to think about your questions, and we will have microphones so that you can stand up and ask and make sure that we can hear it. So when we first started talking with your pearls of wisdom, you talked about the excelling in the seat that you're in and moving on. So talk a little bit about that process, about the mentor process, and that's so important. I know I've heard you talk before and how important that is, but just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, thank you for that question. In the first book, Expect to Win, and chapter 5, I write about the advisor, the mentor, and the sponsor. And the reason I did that was because popular business press loves to say you need a mentor, you need a mentor, you need a mentor, but they don't tell you what a good mentor is supposed to do for you, nor do they delineate the difference between the mentor and the sponsor. An advisor is anybody in your environment that has the intellect and the experience to answer whatever question you're going to have. Oh, Jackie, I'm going to be working with David. Can you introduce me to him on this next project? I want to get to know him before I start this project. Or David, can you walk me through the weighted average cost of capital? I think you all do it differently than I did it in my old firm. Those are examples of discrete questions that you can ask of the advisor. A mentor, on the other hand, is anybody that you really trust and that knows you very well and that understands your context that you're working in. This is the person that you can tell the good, the bad, and the ugly to. The person that you can share your fears, your concerns, your mistakes, your triumphs, your strategies. I'm in this box, I want to be in this box, who do I work and how do I get there? That's the person you can call your mentor. And again, I underscore, you must know that person very well and you must trust them. If you don't trust that that person has your best interest at heart, with all due respect, I would not call them a mentor, I'd call them an advisor. And your mentor does not need to be within your organization, nor do they need to look like you. They just need to understand the context that you're working in, because a mentor's job is to give you tailored advice, tailored specifically to you and to your career aspirations. If I know Jackie and I know Sheila, they both want to become partners, and I'm a good mentor, I'll give them 2 different strategies because they're 2 different women. And my job is to give them tailored advice that they can successfully execute. Now, here's the secret though. You can survive a long time in your career without a mentor, but you will not ascend in any organization without a sponsor. The sponsor is the most important of the 3 relationships. And the sponsor is not the person you tell the good, the bad, and the ugly to. The sponsor is the person you tell the good, and the good. Because this is the person that is carrying your paper into the room. This is the person that behind closed doors will argue passionately on your behalf as to why you should get the next great bonus, why you should get the promotion, why you should get that big opportunity. Make no mistake, this is the person that is spending their valuable political and social capital on you. So it's important that whenever you are in an organization, you ask yourself, who's carrying my paper into the room? And if you can't answer the question, who's carrying my paper into the room, I will tell you to divert some of your hard-working energy into investing in a sponsor relationship, because it is critical to your ability to ascend in that environment.
Excellent. So at this point, we're going to open up the floor, and we have a mic. Just raise your hand if you have questions. Up here. Thank you.
Hi, Carla. I'd like to just a little bit about business. You had a lot of experience in the emerging manager space. That was a big focus for a lot of institutional investors, I want to say, starting maybe 10 years ago with some research that indicated that they outperformed. How has that space evolved since then? I mean, I've seen kind of a drop off in interest, but where do you see that space now? What's kind of the future of that?
Yes, one of the reasons that we wanted to explore the space is because we saw an increase of legislation at the city and state level where they were actually putting it in their statutes that a portion of the pension assets would have to either on a best efforts basis or directly be mandated towards emerging managers. And we didn't think that there was anything on the horizons that would change that, and here's why. As the demographics of the country changes, the pension constituents are going to be, more and more diverse. So therefore, it's going to drive more of an intense conversation at the table around making sure that you have diverse managers. And frankly, the reason why people were able to get away from it before was because these managers were so small, right? And nobody wants to give anybody more, or no asset allocator wants to be more than 20% of anybody's assets under management. So that argued for a small allocation, almost no allocation, because it was like, well, you could be the best manager in the world, but if I'm running $100 billion and you're a $50 million fund, you're not going to make any difference at all in my overall performance. But what is starting to happen now is that you have some of those managers that have been around for almost 20 years now starting to get to sufficient size. That's number one. Number two, the conversation is still happening around the table, no question about it. As we went into a passive phase, then certainly they were disproportionately hurt like everybody else. But now, obviously, you can see what's going on in the papers. People are starting to anecdotally move a little bit back towards active, and I think that's going to play well for some of these emerging managers. So the way the industry has evolved, it used to be the way most of the emerging managers got their allocation was from the manager of managers. So one big manager, and there was sort of 3 or 4, if you count one of them, but there was really 3 big ones that played. Even they are not in that business the same way that they were in that business before. So I think the managers will actually be on their own accord. They understand the game a little bit better, and I think that they will start to benefit directly from allocations from some of the asset allocators and not from the MOMs. Yep.
That's good.
My question has to do with the savings crisis for the baby boomers and their retirement. And I'm particularly interested, since you have a lot of connections with like corporate boards, and you talk about Walmart, the promise of the 401k in my mind has not really come to fruition. I remember distinctly that companies said to promise to their employees, every penny we used to contribute to the pension fund, we're going to give to you to invest tax-free. And yet, we see that match start to shrink, completely evaporate at the recession, so that the 401k participants couldn't average down and get the benefit of the up. So I'm wondering how corporations, how financial professionals should be reacting to this kind of crisis, and if you have any suggestions or comments on that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, that is an awesome question, because if you think about it, most boomers now are at the end of their cycle in many cases. So I'm not sure what, if anything, can be done for that group. And for the older Xers and younger Xers all the way down to the millennials, they've had full disclosure of what they were going to get. So there was not any diminution of value, if you will. If you were an Xer, you came in there and, you know, at best you had a, you know, 403B plan, or you had some other plan, but you already knew what the game was there. So I think it will be the older boomers that, and the boomers period, forget older boomers, boomers period, I think that are going to be hurt because many of them had accounts that suffered greatly during the financial services crisis. And if you took your money out, you really are in trouble now, because trying to put that money back in, the market has moved markedly away from you. So I'm not sure that I have seen anything by any company that suggests that they're going to try to do anything on behalf of, you know, some of the more seasoned, again, not older workers. You know, I think the best is that you do have companies that are hiring, again, seasoned workers, and I think that's going to be the best shot to catch up, frankly, is to work longer than you anticipated working. Because I too have been looking at all the articles, I've been looking at it, and I have not heard, and I speak at a lot of companies. Over the course of a month, I could easily have touched 10 or 15 companies, easy. And I get in a lot of conference rooms with, you know, senior executives, and that is not a topic that people are spending a disproportionate amount of time on. So I am not sure, outside of working longer, what's going to happen there. But I will say this, many of us who had 401k opportunities when we first started, so back in the 80s, I think you had more of an issue than you have today, because nobody, at least for me, no one said, you know, you need to understand how to manage this, right? And in fact, if you were like me and you didn't have any idea of what a 401k was when you went in, and someone said, you know, max it out, and this was your first time making money, you know, my response was, I'm not putting, you know, X amount of my money in that. I'm just starting to make money. I want my money, right? And what really turned me on, frankly, was another good friend who was working at a competitor. She just happened to say one night, well, how much money do you have in your 401k? And I said, well, girl, I only put X%. And she was like, fool, what are you doing? It's a one-to-one match, right? But I didn't know enough about it. And I'm not working in financial services, but I'm working on the institutional side. I'm working in M&A. So I didn't even think about it. So my point to you was the lack of education for anybody going into it at that point. If you were a boomer, if you didn't already come from that, you probably made mistakes. Now, as soon as I had, you know, after she berated me, I went in the next day, you know, went into HR and maxed out everything, and have since then. But we also got heads up when things were going to start to go back down in this direction. And by then I was educated enough to know what that meant, and that I should be, you know, I should compensate for that myself. But most people didn't know.
Hi, Carla. I am in my first year out of college. This may not apply to most people in the room. But my question to you is, not only as a business leader, but also a community leader, what can people my age in their first job, second job, right out of college do to set themselves up? I think a lot of people my age want to get involved in causes maybe faster, not necessarily even at a high board level, but what is your recommendation?
Yes.
To be in the business world, and then also as a community leader?
Absolutely.
To get started early.
Yeah, and I started when I was a first year associate as well. So I don't think that you have to wait until you get to a certain level in your career at all. But my advice is to find something that you're already passionate about, or that you think you would be interested in. I have never been a fan of going on boards just to rub elbows with other important people who are on that board, because that then will feel like work. But so often my board work and my philanthropy has been the thing that has created balance. Because when work was tense and work was really hard, but yet I went over and I invested an hour over here, or I went to that board meeting, or I helped out on that, that would be the thing that would make me feel good, that would balance out this not feeling so good, right? So you'll find that by being involved in things that you're passionate about, that's what creates the balance in your life. And if you have balance, it heightens your probability of sustainable success. Not saying that you won't be successful if you just work. You will be, but I would argue that you're going to crash and burn at some point, right? And you might even burn out earlier than you would if you had some balance in your life. So I think it's mandatory to have some other things that bring you joy, especially when you're young. If all you're doing is working, then your life will become a function of somebody else's day. When your boss doesn't have a good day, you won't have a good day. You have words with a coworker, it'll crush your weekend. You know, a client is upset, it'll completely crush your month. So make sure you have something else in your life that's bringing you joy. And you absolutely can do it. When people say, I don't know how you do it, how you manage all that. We have 24 hours in a day. You'll be surprised how much time you waste worrying about things that you can't control. Just waste, right? And I realized that when I was a first-year associate. I used to watch how my colleagues would just go hang out in that person's office and do that, or stand around in the hall, and you know, and I was thinking, wow, you know, he's still talking, and I've been sitting here for 2 hours doing this stuff, right? Now, part of what he was doing was networking. That was valuable. That was a lesson I had to learn, right? But part of it was too, we waste time. And I think about how much time I wasted worrying about things too. You know, spend an hour thinking about the fact that I presented in so-and-so's office and he didn't seem like he trusted my numbers. Oh, I wonder what that means. I wonder what I could have done. You know, maybe I should have said this. Blew an hour, right? So if you really think about what you want to do and structure it in your day, it can get done.
So that reminds me, as we move to the next person, that reminds me, many of this group saw us with President Bostic about a month ago, and he talked about not worrying about things you can't control. So to your point, once you move past that, you can't control it, you shouldn't worry about it. But what I heard in your response is really, I think, really helpful. It talks about bringing joy. So do the things that bring joy to you, which are going to be different than necessarily than bring joy to me.
That's right.
But if you find your joy, that it can really help a lot in terms of making sure that you have a life well lived and that you have the energy to move forward.
Absolutely.
So that's
and it's fun trying to find your joy, right? Because a lot of people don't know what their joy is. You'd be surprised. I'll never forget, I asked my mother one day, I said, Mama, what brings you joy? And she looked at me like, what was that question? Like, we can all say what makes us happy, but can you say what brings you joy? Right? And so if you can't answer that question, even going on a hunt to find it is worthy. And it's fun.
And I'm guessing that your gospel singing brings you joy.
That brings me joy, and I have a 2-year-old now. That brings me joy sometime. But yeah, absolutely. Ever since I asked her that question, I constantly ask myself that question and make sure that I can answer. And if I'm stuck and I can't answer, that's a problem.
Have you found that your answer changes every time? Now, obviously the 2-year-old is new, but besides that, different
and
seasons.
It should be, right? Because you should be growing, and there should be more and more things that bring you joy. Even the things that you used to think were challenges or hard, you should find a way for that to bring you joy in your finding victory or finding an answer or kind of getting through that. Or the fact that you can get through challenges faster should be something that now is a source of joy, right?
It's a great question. Speaking of questions, anybody else? Okay, on the left.
As a young professional, what's the best way to identify a potential sponsor?
What's the best way to find a potential sponsor?
Yes.
Yes. So here's the profile of a sponsor. Anybody in your environment, remember I said the mentor did not need to be with your environment, within your environment, but the sponsor must be. So spend 2 hours every day just sort of looking around, study in your first month while you're there, just looking around, and it don't have to be 2 consecutive hours. It can be 10 minutes over there, 5. But just spend some real time studying your environment so that you can figure out who has a seat at the decision-making table, who has some juice in those meetings, who do people listen to, who are the toxic people, who are the folks that people migrate towards. So study your environment, and then you can figure out who might be a good sponsor candidate. Then your next screen is, of the people that I think might be good sponsors, are they anywhere in my line where they can see my work? Because your sponsor has to have some exposure to your work in order to have credibility behind closed doors, right? If they don't even work in your department, they have no exposure to your work. When someone says, yeah, Brandy should be the one to get this opportunity, and everybody knows that you don't work with Brandy, that's not gonna hold any water, right? So the person needs to be within your line of sight or have exposure to your work, right? So need to have exposure, need to have a seat at the table, and they need to have some juice to get it done. Once you have identified those 2 or 3 people, then you start finding ways that you can have interaction with them. And it doesn't have to be a 1-hour lunch. It doesn't have to be a direct assignment, but you want to start having touches with them, because the way you build relationship is frequency of touch, right? So you want to have touches with them so you can start to build your relationship. Nirvana is when they say, I'm going to make sure you're successful here. I like you. You're going to do great here, and I'm going to see to it. That's nirvana. But for many of us in that room, this room, that won't happen. So sometimes you have to exercise your power and ask for a sponsor. And if you've built the relationship, now that gives you the basis to say, hey, I know you guys are going to go in that room and have that conversation, and you've had a lot of exposure to my work. I really want this position for these 3 reasons, and here's why I think I'll knock the cover off the ball, and I hope you feel comfortable supporting me when you guys have that conversation. That's your script. All right?
Excellent. Question here?
I actually thought about this when you mentioned your 2-year-old, and congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
What advice do you have for women who would like to put off having children later in their career rather than sooner, and
Yes.
how to navigate through that?
Yes. First of all, that is a very personal decision when you have kids. So one thing I could say to any woman in the room, do not plan around your career around that decision, right? If now is the right time for you to do it, then it's all about how you message it within your organization. I would argue it didn't feel that way when I started my career in the 80s. And I certainly know my colleagues were actively saying, okay, this is a promotion year, I'm gonna wait, and I'm gonna do it the year between VP and ED, because I got 2 years to wait anyway, but it gotta happen right after I'm a VP. I mean, people used to actively try to plan out the calendar that way. And I would say organizations have matured to the point now that you don't have to do that. Which is a great thing. The other thing that's going to happen is that all of these young men now are taking advantage of paternity leave, which is really going to level the playing field. And I'm seeing so many young men who are like, well, I can't wait to take my 3 weeks off or my 4 weeks off. And it's going to become more commonplace as the boomers age, and this whole thing around sick parents and other sick relatives, and people have to take family time off. And it's going to be a great differentiator for companies who offer family time and those who don't, because that's how millennials are going to be making some of their decisions. So for women who want to have kids, I'm saying you don't have to wait until you're older to do it. Now, if you are older and you want to do it anyway, I say the same thing. Make the decision that's the right decision for you, right? Whatever that looks like. And you will find that if you have been doing a great job and wherever you work, the company's going to be supportive. You don't have to walk around and hide anymore, or try to do this and hope they don't see, or stand a little bit like that until I have not seen any evidence in any of the companies, whether it's a consumer product company, technology company, where women have had to do that. I will say that women still think we have to do that. So unfortunately, I don't think that companies have done a good enough job messaging that is ridiculous. So I do still find a lot of women who, take on all this extra stress and burden around having kids because they think it's going to interrupt their career, but it does not have to.
First of all, I just want to say thank you on so many levels, and I want to something you touched on about innovation and inclusion. And I want to ask, what do you see happening on a broader level in the boardroom, on the landscape in the boardroom, and what's happening there now?
Yes, I will tell you that more and more, I think boards are asking the question, which is provoking the change. And you asked me something earlier that I didn't answer about women on boards. There's an article today in the Wall Street Journal about how the mandates, if you will, quotas, targets, whatever word you want to use, has dramatically changed the landscape of boards in Europe. And I think it's only a matter of time before that comes here, when clearly there's been a massive resistance in this country to have any kind of targets or quotas around numbers of women on the board. But I think it's going to be inevitable. And there's a lot of women who are against it, by the way, right, in this country. But I find that boards are talking about it more actively now because they understand that this new consumer and this new professional cares a lot about it, and that's what's driving it. That's one of the reasons that I love the millennials, because I think that which we have been trying to do as boomers for 20 or 30 years, they're gonna turbo boost it. It's gonna get done in a fraction of the time because they are not shy to exercise their voice and their demands, and it's part of what matters to them. So boards are talking about that. They're talking about social media and franchise. They're talking about, almost every every company that I can imagine is talking about Amazon, because it's, you know, it's quickly becoming a noun and a verb, right? Just like Google was. And people are also very concerned about artificial intelligence and virtual reality. Those are other things that I hear. Again, transportation companies. That, I mean, you would think about that in technology, but you know, transportation companies, industrial companies, companies that you wouldn't even imagine thinking about that. And the artificial intelligence thing is something that's on everybody's board table, because it's going to have real implications for our workforce, right? Real implications.
So as young girls are looking to people that have done so well, and you're such a great role model for them.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about who was a role model for you that you looked up to, and secondarily, who pushed you up from behind? Because I think it's helpful to have both of those.
Yes, I will tell you that my two biggest female role models were my paternal grandmother, who I've already referenced, who was the first female entrepreneur that I ever knew, and my mother. And my mother was a master multitasker. She was an educator, a wife, a mother, involved in the community. So I really grew up thinking that I could have it all. There was no idea of a trade-off in my mind, because my mama did it all, right? So, so when I hear senior women now suggest that there are trade-offs, I always bristle, because I just did not have that exposure, and I don't feel that way today. And my paternal grandmother, because she was such an amazing businesswoman and she was no nonsense, and I definitely think that's where I get a lot of my business drive and demeanor, if you will.
Directness, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I'll say that I mentor a lot of young women, and they inspire me the other way. I mean, there have been times when I've asked myself the question, well, is it time to kind of hang up my cleats here? But then I'll see another young woman who's that far away from getting promoted, and I know that if I'm in the room, it'll make a difference. Or I know if I say the right thing to someone, because I'm in the seat that I'm in, it's going to make a difference. And there have been times when that has been my inspiration to push right through. Yeah.
That's great. I think a lot of us forget sometimes that we do make a difference.
Oh, yeah.
Not only for those that are above, but for those that are below, to give, right?
No question.
To give some encouragement too. So thank you for giving that encouragement to people.
But thank you very much.
It really means a lot. Are there any other questions? I think we have time for probably one or two more.
Hi, thank you, Carla. It's so nice to hear you. You talked about your mother and your grandmother being these phenomenal women, and your mom being this multitasker. What advice do you have for women who are working, who have families, who have equal passion for their families and their career aspirations? Can you offer any suggestions or
Absolutely.
tips?
My biggest piece of advice: find out what success looks like in your household, and do not measure yourself against somebody else's report card. So often I find people saying, well, I don't think I'm a great mother because I didn't go to all of Johnny's soccer games. And look at Sam's mom. She's at every soccer game and she always brings the snacks. I'm such a terrible mother. Well, Johnny may not want you at all the soccer games, right? He may only want you to come when he feels like he got it now, right? And so often I feel people feel less than because they're comparing themselves to somebody else. Whatever works for your household, with your partner, with whoever you bring into your household to help you do whatever else you need to do, and don't feel any shame in that game either. If your mother was somebody who cleaned the house and the house was, you know, just clean all the time, you could eat off the floors, but you can't even seem to get a broom in your hand once a month, but that's your household. Right? So if you have to get somebody with help for that, that's okay. Because you're saying, I'm going to take 3 hours that I would have been doing that and actually spend with Johnny now. Or I'm going to go do something else. But whatever works for your household where it's humming and everybody's happy, that's all that matters. And don't ever think that you are, you know, losing out on, that you're not giving your work all that you should because today I spent 5 hours on personal things. There's going to be another day that you spend 13 hours on work and 0 on personal. But that's what that day demanded. And it all evens out at the end of the day. So you must identify what is most important for you and prioritize that. And you don't have to explain it to anybody. You don't have to tell everybody how you made your decision. You don't have to announce that when you're leaving at 1 o'clock because you want to take your daughter to the doctor's office, or you want to go actually to a ballet recital just to watch her practice. You don't have to say, I'm leaving early today, right? If you're the person in charge, leave. Leave, just make. But women, we tend to announce, I have to leave early today. You know, and it took me a long time before I would watch my colleagues. They'd come in, take off that blazer, leave it on the chair. It was gone the rest of the day, right? And I didn't know I've been playing golf with somebody, right? But because the work never suffered, as long as the work gets done, the work gets done, right? So that you have to get really comfortable within yourself about that, and then execute. Don't compare. Don't look left, don't look right, look straight ahead. But what's important in your household? Right? I think we did it, Jackie?
I think so. I think we're all done. Any last questions? Okay, we did it. Thank you so much for coming.
Happy New Jackie.
And thank y'all for wearing your pearls.
And thank you for wearing the pearls. You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, man.
Thank you. That was great.